Hi everyone, this is Dr. Robin Lewis. I'm a naturopathic physician practicing here in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. And today I want to talk to you about magnesium. So I want to talk to you about what magnesium is, why it's useful, but more importantly, what to look for when you go out and buy a supplement. So, the supplement industry as a whole is a fairly poorly regulated industry. There are so many products out there, there are so many different formulations, and not all of them are validated. So, it's really important to be educated when you go into buying a supplement because there's a lot of garbage products out there. When it comes to magnesium, this is even further complicated by the fact that there are many different forms of magnesium. And depending on the form that you get, it can behave totally different in the body and have completely different therapeutic uses. So you really do want to pay attention to what form that you're buying so that you are getting the right form for the right job. And I don't know if you guys can notice in the video here, but I do have a little bit of a funny sounding voice. I'm recovering from a cold and my voice has apparently not caught up to that. So bear with me, guys. I might have a little bit of a funky voice, but hopefully it's enough that you can understand me today. So in general, just as a caveat, I do recommend that you consult with a doctor like myself who really understands medicine, but who also really understands supplementation and nutrition before going on any products. Because as you will see when we go through this, magnesium is used for a lot of things like fatigue, for example, which can be created through a lot of different deficiencies, a lot of different disease processes. So you really want to make sure that magnesium is appropriate for you in the first place. You don't want to waste your money on a product that isn't useful for you. But if you're going to go out there and buy it anyways, this is the video for you. I will help guide you to the right supplement for the right job so that if you are going to try magnesium, you're at least doing it with the right forms of magnesium for the right reasons. But before we jump into the different forms of magnesium, I first need to introduce you to magnesium itself. So magnesium is technically a mineral. So that would be similar to things like calcium and iron in the body. They're technically in this category of minerals. And magnesium is one of the most abundant minerals in the body. So the majority of it is found in the bone, but it's also used in hundreds and hundreds of different reactions in the body. It's a common cofactor. So what that means is it helps these reactions work better. So this is why, as we will get into it, magnesium can have a very broad effect in the body. So if you are deficient in it, running low in it, the symptoms that you experience can be quite varied from person to person, and they're not just isolated to one system of the body. For example, like the nervous system. It's used all over the body. So when I go over the potential signs of a magnesium deficiency, do know that not everyone will have all of these. Certain people will have susceptibilities in different areas. So take it with a grain of salt. Everyone's not going to have all of these symptoms, but if you do have some of these symptoms, it could be because of a magnesium deficiency. Magnesium deficiency can lead to things like mood disorders. So depression and anxiety can be a product of a magnesium deficiency. It can also lead to a lot of headaches and migraines. In general, it's considered a nervous system relaxant versus like a stimulant like coffee. So a lot of these symptoms you will notice are a nervous system symptom. It can also be very important when it comes to sleep and insomnia. Overall muscle tension, muscle cramping, things like that. Poor concentration, memory issues. It can even make you more susceptible to things like insulin resistance, which if you go back to my last video, I talk about insulin resistance and what that means. So it's a blood sugar issue. It can even have an impact on things like hypertension and the function of your blood vessels. So magnesium is used for a lot of different things in the body. And so the deficiency symptoms can show up in a lot of different areas. So those are not all of the potential signs of a deficiency, but those are definitely the most common ones that I see in my practice. So this then begs the question, how common is a magnesium deficiency in the first place? Is this something that you even have to worry about? Well, depending on the resource that I looked at, they're estimating about half to 3/4 of the population has some form of magnesium deficiency. Now, those are including mild deficiencies, but nonetheless, that is a huge number. So, why? Why is it so common? Well, I like to break it down into two different categories. The magnesium coming in, so how much you are consuming in your diet, for example, and the magnesium going out. So, are you not getting enough in, or is too much going out? So I'll kind of walk you through those two scenarios and you will understand why magnesium deficiencies are so common. All right, so let's first talk about the magnesium coming into the diet. If you look over the course of history, our magnesium consumption is going down with time, which is not the same as every single type of mineral. Calcium, for example, has gone up in the diet. People are getting more calcium than they used to. Magnesium is the opposite. If they look at trends, we are getting less and less magnesium in the diet. Now, there's a couple reasons they suspect this is the case. One has to do with processing our food. So processed foods are notoriously deficient in most vitamins and minerals. But if you look at magnesium, for example, whole wheat grain, when we mill it down into white flour, it removes about 85% of the magnesium inside of that food. So you've taken a food that naturally did have magnesium in it, and you've ripped all the magnesium out of it during that processing. So this is a major reason why we're losing magnesium in our diet. But what if you're not eating a processed diet? What if you generally have a pretty well-rounded whole foods diet? Can you still get magnesium deficient then? The short answer is yes. So the reason for this is our farming practices. So pesticides, for example, will deplete the nutrients inside of that food, magnesium specifically. So they have found that our fruit and vegetable nowadays has approximately 35% less magnesium than it used to. And one of the big factors in that is spraying our food with pesticides, which will suck the nutrients out of the soil, making those crops less likely to have these nutrients, because where do they get their nutrients? They pull it out of the soil. So that's a big factor. The foods that include magnesium are things like our nuts and seeds, legumes, grains, leafy greens, some fruit, cocoa. All of these plant-based foods are really where we're getting our magnesium from. And so if we have really nutrient poor soils, then that's going to be reflected in the crops. And so that's another big reason why magnesium deficiencies can be common, even if you are eating a more whole food diet. If you take this even further and you look at our water supply, they're even pulling the nutrients out of that. So during the filtration process, we lose all of the minerals that would naturally exist in something like spring water. And so that's why you'll see a lot of these fancier filtration systems have like a remineralization process, is because they're trying to add those minerals back into the water, because our common tap water, for example, has stripped all of those out of it, or at least in places in the world like where I live. So even our water is deficient in magnesium. So these are the big reasons why you might become magnesium deficient through things that you consume. Now let's talk a little bit more about how we use magnesium in the body, and are you losing more magnesium, and that's why you're becoming deficient as well. So probably one of the most common reasons we're losing a lot of magnesium is gastrointestinal disorders. So diseases or dysfunction of your gut, intestines, and colon. So the more severe cases are things like celiac disease, which is actually quite common. And again, I did a video on this previous if you want to look into it. Things like irritable bowel disease like colitis and Crohn's, which are on the rise, and even something like IBS, where you have like a lot of looser stools, will cause you to lose more minerals than if your gut was working really well. And how many of us know people who have tummy troubles, right? How many people have chronically loose stools and just count it as normal? We're losing minerals in there. And so that's a very common reason we might be magnesium overall mineral deficient because of a disorder of the gut. Another extremely common reason why someone might be magnesium deficient is high stress. Yeah, you heard me right. High stress will deplete and cause you to lose more magnesium. And I'm sure this is something that a lot of us can relate to. And so if we're more stressed, we do lose magnesium more easily. Another common reason is exercise. So during exercise, we sweat it out. We will increase the urination of magnesium, so we'll lose it through our urine. And magnesium is used a lot when it comes to building new protein. So when it comes to exercise, you're creating micro tears in your muscles that need to get rebuilt, and that's how you grow muscles. So that process uses a lot of magnesium. So exercise is a very common reason why healthy individuals who are doing the right things, they're eating the whole foods, they're exercising, might become magnesium deficient. So even if you're getting enough through the diet, you might be burning through more of it because you're so active. Another big reason, which I kind of alluded to before, is you're urinating too much magnesium out. So this would be when people are taking diuretics. So coffee and alcohol are great examples of common day diuretics, meaning something that makes you pee more, that a lot of us are consuming. And again, it potentially is depleting some of our magnesium. We lose a lot of magnesium through the kidneys. And the other major cause of magnesium loss that very much goes overlooked is medications. So yes, diuretic medications that a lot of people with hypertension are on, but also even our common medications like birth control. Some birth controls deplete our magnesium. Things like acid suppressing therapies will deplete our magnesium. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a diuretic medication for it to deplete your magnesium. So this is just to show you how many different ways someone can become magnesium deficient, and this is why it is one of the most common nutrient deficiencies that I see in my practice. So now that we've covered why you might become magnesium deficient, let's talk about the supplements that you should be taking if you want to replete that magnesium. So when looking at the different types of magnesium, I like to categorize them into two separate categories. There is the inorganic magnesium salts and the organic magnesium salts. Now, the reason I like to separate them into the two is because the inorganic salts tend to perform worse than the organic salts. And I'm going to explain what I mean by that. So examples of inorganic magnesium salts are things like magnesium sulfide, magnesium oxide, and magnesium chloride. So these are common forms that you will see put into supplements, and the most common by far is magnesium oxide. Now, magnesium oxide really isn't well absorbed. So that's what I mean by it doesn't perform as well. For the most part, when you're taking a magnesium supplement, you're hoping that it gets absorbed into the body, into the bloodstream, so it can have a whole body effect. Magnesium oxide likes to stay in the gut. So what it is really useful for is alleviating constipation. Because it stays in the gut, it'll pull water into the gut and it'll soften your stools. So if that's what you want to use magnesium for, great. Magnesium oxide are very effective for that. Now, if you don't have a constipation problem, you probably don't want those forms of magnesium because you cannot reach the doses you want to have a therapeutic effect without getting some loosening of those stools. And for someone who has chronically loose stools, this is going to make that situation even worse. So that's really the only place that I think these particular forms of magnesium are useful. But strangely enough, they are the more common forms because you can fit a larger volume of them into one pill and they're really inexpensive. So this is a big thing that I'm counseling a lot of my patients on, is even though it's a cheaper supplement for what looks like the same dose, you are not absorbing that. So it is not going to have that effect on your brain health, for example, your nervous system, your cardiovascular system, as much as some of these other forms that I'm going to talk about, because it's just simply not getting into your body. It's staying local to the gut and having a local effect. The second category is organic magnesium salts. So the most common ones I see are things like citrate, magnesium citrate, malate, bisglycinate, and L-threonate. Now, these are not the only forms, but I'm just talking about the most common forms that you're going to see in most formulations. And so these ones as a whole do absorb better than the inorganic salts. I will say citrate and malate, though, are kind of middle of the road. So they're not as well absorbed as the other two, but they're certainly better than something like oxide. So when they studied magnesium citrate, for example, yes, it does absorb better than magnesium oxide. But in some individuals who are a little bit more sensitive, it will still create loose stools. And it can still be an effective supplement for constipation. So the citrate and the malate, I'd say, are about middle of the road as far as how well absorbed they are. If you don't have a super sensitive stomach to something like magnesium, you might get away with it. But these next two forms that I'm going to talk about are definitely my favorite forms of magnesium. So my all-time favorite magnesium supplement that I use in the majority of my patients is magnesium bisglycinate. It's also called magnesium chelate. They're usually used kind of interchangeably in the language around magnesium. The reason I really like this one is because the glycine, so the bisglycinate, the glycinate part of that, is actually an amino acid. So if you look at how magnesium exists naturally inside of plants, it's usually complexed with amino acids. And this actually improves the absorption of that mineral because now you're absorbing it through channels that are exclusive to amino acids and not just mineral channels when it comes to getting absorbed. So this is definitely much better absorbed than some of these more traditional forms of magnesium. And so magnesium bisglycinate will actually get into the body a lot easier and have a more widespread whole body effect. So I'm using this a lot for people with muscle cramps, insomnia, overall tension in the body, things like that. Magnesium bisglycinate is going to be my go-to supplement for those sort of cases. Now, the last form I'm going to talk about is super interesting, and I'm going to explain why. Magnesium threonate, or L-threonate, is very useful for things that you want to accomplish in the brain. So the brain has a very picky, what's called the blood-brain barrier. So your brain is super important, as I'm sure we can all kind of guess. It controls everything inside the whole body. So it is super selective about what it allows into the brain. So not all of the nutrients that get into your bloodstream are allowed in the brain. It is highly selective about what it lets in there. So the threonate part is a central nervous system transporter. So the threonate will help transport the magnesium past the blood-brain barrier into your brain. So it can have more of a cognitive effect. And so this is really, really helpful for things like concussions or cognitive impairments or Alzheimer's. Like if your goal is to get magnesium into the brain, threonate is the form that you're going to be looking for. I will say it is also the most expensive form. So I do reserve it for the cases that really need it. But if you really need it, threonate is an absolute game changer. It's a really powerful way of getting magnesium into the brain. And so that's really important to know when you're going to buy your supplements, right? A lot of people will go to the supplement store, they just hear magnesium's good for whatever, and they'll look and they'll be like, okay, well, this form's the least expensive, so I'm going to grab it. Well, if you're trying to recover from something like a concussion, it's probably not going to make much of a dent when it comes to your cognitive symptoms. And so this is really where you want to be educated when you're going to buy these products, because you could just end up wasting your money. So yes, it's less expensive, but it didn't accomplish what you wanted it to. So these are important things to know. So those are the most common forms of magnesium that I see on the shelves. These are the things that people are coming in and asking me questions about. So I feel like this is a really good place to end. You should be able to go find a magnesium supplement based on this. Now, as far as dosages, is it the right thing for you? Should you even be on a magnesium? That's more of a question to have with your healthcare provider. But I really hope that this has been helpful for you today. So I hope this brings you more confidence when it comes to you going out there and trying to get supplements for yourself. You know, we don't always have a fun time when we're in the supplement store because there's just way too many options. So hopefully this really helps you figure out what those different options are and which is the best form for you. Thank you guys so much for listening and bearing through what is my very raspy, sick person voice. I really look forward to seeing you guys again next week. And if there are any other topics that you'd like me to dive into, please comment those below. Take care.